In this video, I'm going to answer the top 5 questions people ask me after I lower my Honda Accord with lowering springs. I lowered my car 12 months ago and since driven about 10,000 miles. So this will also be a review of what's it like to live with the Eibach Pro Kit lowering springs. This is actually my 5th lowered car, going back to about 20 years. So I also incorporate some of the things I gather from the other cars in this review. The first question people often ask is, can I use my stock shocks? My answer is yes, if you purchase the car new. I see nothing wrong with using the stock shocks. I've been using it since day one after installation, and I started the installation when the car had about 10,000 miles or so. Right now it's at 20,000 miles. On my past cars where I used the stock shocks, I've gotten about 40 or so thousand miles on them. And even when I did replace them, it was not because the shocks were worn. It was more so because I wanted to get new tires, and therefore I will need new alignment. And when you consider all of that together, it might make sense to replace the shocks and do it all at once. If you got a new car to start from, I think it's okay to use the stock shocks. Obviously, if your car is a few years old and there's already a lot of miles on those shocks, then perhaps you might want to replace them all at the same time. Now the Pro Kit only lowers it about an inch or so it's not all that aggressive. Obviously, if you got some race springs and you do track your car, then it might make sense to replace it with high performance shocks. For most of us who just drive on the road daily to and from work, stock shocks will work okay. Question number 2. Do I need a camber kit? When you lower a car, the natural geometry of the suspension will cause the wheels to tilt in, and that creates negative camber. A little bit of negative camber is actually good for the suspension if you're going to make some aggressive turns, as it can put more rubber on the ground and gives you better handling. However, in normal driving, it will cause the inside of the tire to wear out faster than the outside. Is it an issue to have a little bit more negative camber? Do I have excessive tire wear on the inside of my tire? The answer is yes. But for me and where I live, dry rot is a bigger issue. My tires often don't last that long. They started to show evidence of cracking on the sidewalls maybe about 4 or 5 years. So I often replace them. So having excess tire wear on the inside is not an issue, especially when I try to rotate my tires often, maybe about 5,000 miles or so. Question number 3, do I need an alignment? After I had my car lowered, I really didn't feel that I needed one because the car still tracks straight. I still got an alignment because that seems to be the right thing to do. So where did I go to get the alignment? Fortunately, I knew someone at the dealership that was experienced with lowering cars, and he also works at a Honda dealership. So therefore, he assigned it to the proper technician to do the alignment on a lower car. I'll post the specs of the alignment results before and after for your review. Question number 4, how does it ride? Well, in my case, it rides pretty much like stock. This is the Accord Sport model, so it already rides pretty stiff. So having the Eibach Pro Kit lowering springs really doesn't change the ride much. on rough road surfaces, there seems to be a little bit more movement or motion in the car. But other than that, it rides pretty much like stock. When I did have lower trim models as a comparison, the LX model for example, the transformation from lowering springs versus a stock is night and day. It really changes the characteristic of the car. But if you already have a more sport or performance grade suspension on your car, there really isn't going to be much difference. Does it improve performance and handling? Not really in my case, because this is already the sport model. So it feels pretty much the same with the lowering springs on. Of course, I have not tracked the car, so I don't know if there's really an improvement in handling on the upper limits. Question number 5. Does the car make any strange noises or warning lights after installing lowering springs? In my case, no, not really. First of all, there were no warning lights because the shocks is not the new electronic suspension system where it's able to adjust the ride and firmness of the suspension. So therefore, I don't have any electronic components connected to the suspension, so it was okay for me to install lowering springs without those warning lights. So what about noises? Assuming you got everything tightened up, in my case, there's still a little bit of suspension clanging noise when you go over certain bumps. That's because in my case, the top part of the spring is wanded pretty tight. So therefore, the top part of the spring do hit against each other in certain situations. I did put back the OEM spring silencer, which is this rubber padding that goes on the coil spring. But perhaps if I were to do it over again, I might order another one to install it to give a little bit more dampening so the springs don't touch each other when they compress. This happens on this car, but it didn't happen on other cars, so every car is going to be a little bit different. Or even perhaps where I locate the spring silencer could have made a difference. So maybe I'll revisit that when it comes time to replace the shocks. And that is it. The top 5 questions people ask me regarding lowering springs. I hope you find this video useful and thank you for watching. I will conclude this video with what you really want to see, is how it looks.